Welcome to Stitch Crazy. Today I am going to show you how to make, it's called the stained glass quilt. And I was trying to figure out what I could do with scraps of fabric, and I had different sizes of blocks, rectangles. As you can see in this quilt here, this is what I'm going to make today. And I have all different size of blocks, 2.5-inch strips, different sizes, squares and longer rectangles. And also here, what I will do today is I'm trying to get like the same size width in each row, and they can be different as far as length in your blocks. And then here another one, make sure the widths are the same, but they can be different lengths on the blocks. And what I've done here is to make it look like a stained glass, I have put black strips in between all of my squares. Okay, on the back of this quilt, I have just taken different types of fabric. What I did is I took one of the strips and put it in the main back, and I was just trying to use up some scraps, so my back is made of all different colors. Okay, so we are going to try to make this quilt today. What we will need: your sewing machine, of course, and thread, your cutting board, your cutting tools. I've got 2 different sizes of rulers, and then if you have squares, there are squares that you can buy too. I don't have those with me today, but there are squares. You'll need a scissors, some extra thread, measuring tape. I got some pins here, and I have some needles for when, after we get this all tied together, I usually tie it with floss. Okay, so, and you need a background fabric. In this one we've got black, but you can also go with gray, a light gray, or a dark gray, or a light blue, or gold, whatever you want your quilt to be. Okay, so we need lots of scraps of fabric too. These would be like the background, and we have a large amount. And then the scraps would be any pieces of fabric that you've had from other projects and you don't want to throw them. You put them in a little pile for later, and then you can cut them out into squares and rectangles as you go. Okay, so the first thing, after we've decided what size of quilt that we want, we need to know how wide we want to go, and we want to know how long we want to go. Now on this quilt, I put my rows up and down the length. So I made this one 69 inches long. So that's how long I want each one of my rows. So my first step, the length and the width that I want to go. And that can vary as you're making it. If you decide you want an inch or 2 wider, the length you would want to do right away, because it's a little harder to add the length and keep the same style of the quilt that you're making. So we want to know for sure what length we want, and then we can play with the width as we're adding the rows onto the quilt. Okay, so once you have your tools to work with, you have your scraps, and like when you get your scraps, the first thing we're going to be doing is making different blocks. Like these are 2.5-inch wide. And then, let's see if this is the same. It is the same. So then I just kind of pile those same sizes together. This one's a little, nope, it's the same size. Okay. Here's some wider ones. And these can be squares and rectangles in the same. Let's see. And then I have some wider blocks here and wider. And they can be as big as you want them to be. Let's see. and I even have some bigger yet. Okay, so once we have a variety of scraps cut into the different sizes, like I said, we want to know what our length is and we want to know what our background fabric is. So on my background, what I have done is I have cut 2.5-inch strips of the background. And so the background fabric, you want quite a bit of yardage. I'd say at least 3 yards of fabric. You might have a little left over when you're done, but 3 yards is a good amount.
Faster than fast internet is here. Valley now has higher broadband speeds of up to 1 gigabit. Get the bandwidth you need for all your devices at one time. Gaming with no lag time. Video stream your favorite movies instantly in HD quality. Video chat with friends and family without interruption. Download your favorite music and photos in seconds. All on our 100% fiber optics network. Valley offers managed Wi-Fi and backup services too, bringing together all the services you need. Valley Telecommunications Cooperative.
Okay, so if we're not sure what we want to have for our background strips, there's a way of kind of auditioning those strips. This one I wanted, these are older blocks, so I kind of wanted them to pop. So with black, that makes a difference. So now if you're not sure if you want like blue, what you would do is you would lay out that fabric. Just take your fabric and lay it out. And then what I would do is I would just kind of lay my blocks. You can even use a black one, being as that's not going to be your background. And then you could just take and lay these blocks onto the background fabric to see if you like that look. Go like this, okay? So now we got the blue. Let's try it with the gray. I prefer black myself, but you can do the gray, lay the gray fabric down, and then just kind of lay your blocks, same sizes, of course, together, and then just kind of leave a little bit of the fabric, the background fabric. So you're just kind of auditioning it to see, here's like if you put it up, then you can see, oh, do I like it? Yes, no. If you don't, you can just change it. So the background fabric is whatever color you want it to be. And that color, if it's not black, it may bring out a certain color in your blocks. And it's kind of nice. I mean, you can lay it all out on the floor, lay all your blocks, and then kind of walk away from it, come back and go, yes, no. And that's how you can audition your different fabrics if you don't want to use black in the background. Okay, so first of all, we have our blocks all cut into different sizes, and then we're going to take our background fabric and we're going to cut them into 2.5-inch strips. And then what I do is I lay out my fabric and I take my ruler, and it's got like 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. So then I would lay it down on here to 2.5. And today I didn't bring my rotary cutter, but if I had it, then I would lay this down at 2.5 and I would cut my strips. And this is what the strips will look like when you're done. And you don't have to have 2.5. If you want them 1.5, a little thinner strip in between, or if you want a wider strip, that's entirely up to you what you want your quilt. I find that 2.5 is a nice size strip to put in between your blocks. Okay, so once you've got your strips cut, we're going to decide, okay, this strip, I want my blocks to be these thinner ones. Okay.
Valley is now offering updated digital TV packages and prices. High definition and caller ID is now free with all TV packages. Call Valley today at 437-2615 to find out more.
Okay, so the pieces onto the strip. We have our long strip, and then we can just lay a couple of these down because you're just gonna like continually feed them into your machine. And so we will take this and just line it up against the edge of the fabric. Okay. Okay. So then you would just keep stitching one block onto the strip and keep continuing on. And then once we get the blocks, once we get the strip, then we would cut them off of the strip. You would have the piece and the black strip. And so you'd have multiple of those, and then you just sew, like this one has a black piece, leave one for the bottom, then you have your block. Then you sew your next piece onto this, take it back, sew it, and then you have the two strips until you get the length of your quilt. Okay? And then once you get your length of your quilt, then I take a plain strip of black and I sew it on one side. Then I take another piece of black and I sew that strip on the other side. Now, I sew like one here, then my black strip, then I go back to my machine and I sew another, depending on, okay, now this time I want this size, and the next time I may want a bigger size, and you just keep making your rows. And you can just make your rows and then put them together later, just as long as you have them all the same length. And then if you have one that you have your perfect length, if the other ones are longer, you can cut them off as you're going. And you may have to like alter the bottom. If this one was like too long and I want black at the bottom, then I would just cut this block off and add my black piece on there to make it the length that I want. So there's a little bit of altering in there when you're doing the blocks and the rows. So what I did here, on this particular quilt, I made my whitest blocks and put them in the middle. Now, there's no rules on how to do this. So I did my bigger blocks in the middle. This row and this row are the same size. I put this row and this row the same width. And then I did the narrow ones at the end. Now you can do that completely opposite, or if you want a big block with a narrow one here, and then another big one, you can do that. So this can change from the way I have it made. Now, once you get your top made, then you decide on your back. So on this one, I decided to put my strip on the middle of the back, and then I had to measure my length and my width. And I had to make sure that I had enough fabric when I was sewing my back. Okay, so now the only thing that's left here, I laid this out on the table and made sure the middle of this was in the middle of my quilt, which this back can be any way you want. It can be all one piece to make it easier. This one I just decided to use up some scraps of fabric, so it's a lot of different colors. And then I laid out my back, I put my batting, which you can see there's batting in here, and then I put my top on here. And then what I did is I went and I pinned the whole thing down. Because what I like to do after I get it all pinned, I like to flip it around to make sure that my back lays nice and flat. I don't want any puckers or, you know, like the bunched up. So, and then if it is, then I have to take it apart again and redo it. And then what I did here is I decided that I wanted black floss. You can use yarn too, but it's a little harder to pull the yarn through as far as for me. I like using the floss. I just square knot when I'm tying it, the square knot. And then what I did is I cut, these were 2.5 inch strips. So that's what I like to use for my binding, is 2.5 inch strips. So I went and cut my 2.5 inch strip. What you need to do is you need to measure your width and your width, add them together, your length and your length, and add them together, plus 10. That's how many inches of binding you're going to need for this quilt. And so then what I did is I needed 262 inches to do this quilt. So I cut this black strip in 2.5 inch strips. Here's my strip, 2.5, and I folded it in half. So now when I'm going to be sewing it onto the quilt, I will find kind of like a medium place to start. And I always leave like 5-6 inches at the edge. And then I line it up with the edge, and then I'm going to be sewing it. Now that I have everything tied together, I can cut this excess extra batting off to match, so the seams match. And then what I do is I sew it all the way around, and then I just flip it, and I do hand stitch my binding to the back. Some people use the machine and sew it with the machine, but I like to hand stitch my bindings. Now, there's one other thing that I do with my quilts, and I haven't always done this, but I'm starting to because the South Dakota Quilt Guild likes you to do this. I've made a little label, and it says who it's going to, who it's from, and I put the year that it was made. So when I'm done with this, I'll just take and at the bottom of the quilt, I'll just fold this under both ways, and then I'll just hand stitch it somewhere on the back of my quilt. Okay? So it's kind of nice because 20 years from now, if this is passed down to somebody else in the family, they'll know who made it and who it was from, to and from, and what year it was made. And the Quilt Society likes to have that information. So I hope you have enjoyed the show today. You can make this quilt any colors, any background, any size. You can make it like a lap size if you want to. So I hope you've enjoyed the show today. If you want to be a host, or if you have any ideas for me to present at the show, please give me a call at 437-2615. Thank you.